Hi folks. You'll still be having a microphone, but we're recording, so we'll make sure that it gets heard. Thanks for being here. We'll go ahead and do introductions really quick, but yeah, welcome to the Arts Advocacy, How to Be an Individual in Arts Advocacy panel. Pass it to Chris.
Hi folks, my name is Chris Bakish. I use he pronouns. I'm an executive director with Celebration Theater, which is Southern California's longest running queer and allied theater company.
Hi everybody, thanks for being here. I know there's so much going on, so I'm actually really happy to see some faces out here. I'm Ricky Abeles, my pronouns are they, them. I'm the Director of Policy and Advocacy with Arts for LA, the region's only and leading arts advocacy organization, cross-sectoral, cross-discipline. And when I say that, I always like to be specific. It's not that other organizations don't do advocacy, they do, but we cover all the disciplines and that's our main purpose. So we don't do like in-school programming or anything like that, like a lot of other nonprofits. We're focused on training advocates.
And I did not introduce myself. My name is Michaela Buckley. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm the admin coordinator with Theater Commons Los Angeles, which is a service organization dedicated to theater. And so we partner a lot with Arts for LA because they do a lot of the heavy lifting and then we push forward on theater-specific things that we're trying to get across. And thank you all for being here. We'll go ahead and get started with the first question, which is, how did you personally, I know we talked a bit that we all do advocacy as part of our jobs, but how did you as a person get involved in arts advocacy?
Sure, do you want me to start? I'll date myself a long time ago. No. And I guess it started more sort of in activism. I don't know. I think a lot of people in the arts in particular are in the space of storytelling because they care about society, they care about their communities, they see injustices, they want to tell stories that might have impact where we can, all feel like we belong. And so I think through that lens, I found myself interested in getting involved even as a young person when I was in college. I mean, one of my summer jobs, the picture at 1999 in Illinois, going door to door for both Greenpeace and then Human Rights Campaign. And those experiences were pretty formative for me, just to see who was willing to engage on issues and who wasn't. And it was sort of scary for me at the time. Even though I was in the arts and a theater person, I was, I felt safer in a script, like Chris the person having to go sort of toe to toe with people was a little scarier, but it was, I think if you find issues that speak to your values and really things that you want to fight for, then you can kind of get out of your own way, and that's been sort of some of my story over the years. But I worked, I stayed involved over the years through my 20s in a variety of capacities, and so I've always been a little bit interested in politics as well, and so I went to protests and I got involved with some legislative causes and things like that. A lot of canvassing, some direct action. When I got into the arts spaces, particularly, I think through my time with Celebration Theater, which is not just a theater company that's telling stories, but has a very specific social impact mission to it. That's where some of the opportunity to be involved more in advocacy started to matter or to kind of crop up for me. So whether it's been getting involved in campaigns and coalitions that are fighting for increased arts funding, knowing what the historic underfunding of the arts in California is, or it's access to resources, and or visibility and safety for queer people in social spaces. That's sort of what's driven me. So.
Yeah, well, I kind of was raised by my family to advocate. My parents both worked for the education system, and then my mom was involved with her union, and so she was like her chapter president, and she would take us to strikes to fight for higher pay for folks who work for the Cal State system. And my grandma was in the state legislature, and then she was in Congress, and so I kind of just like grew up around being involved and felt like it was my responsibility. But really why I got into what I do now is because I was an actor for about 8 years after I graduated from a BFA program. And I was just so angry. I felt like every time I was cast in a show and I thought that there was something disrespectful or racist or just inequitable, and I would speak up, I would be told to shut up, and that it wasn't my place, and that I was just an actor and I should just do my job. Kind of like what you hear the general public say about a lot of celebrity actors. And I was like, what the hell is this? Aren't we supposed to be like the inclusive and welcoming sector? And so I kind of just reached a breaking point where I felt like I'm so sick of being treated this way, and clearly I want to continue to speak out, and so I should go find another way to do that and help make it better for the artists who do want to continue to pursue acting. And so I went back to get my master's in public policy, and when I graduated, I landed here at Arts for LA, kind of just by mistake. I wasn't even trying to work in like arts policy. I didn't know that that existed. And I was looking at more like education-based stuff, and it just so happened that this job married everything that I cared about. And I would say that I'm more passionate about advocacy now than I've ever been in my life.
I also want to emphasize that Ricky is doing a fantastic job at Arts for LA.
Wow, thank you.
You actually reminded me of my first time that I really did advocacy, which was in high school. We had a trans student, and a security guard was picking on them because the security guard thought it was a boy wearing girls' clothes. And so I was a total nerd and read this school handbook and found the loophole that said there's no like gender with the items. And so I went to the principal and said, the security guard is harassing this student based on rules that don't exist. Can we implement something that says like there is no gendered things within the student handbook? And so yeah, that was my first advocacy, was dress codes for trans children to get them to wear what they wanted, not to get them to dress as gender.
That was clear.
Yeah, okay. So I know there's been a lot of activism this week in LA. Would you define a little, just to you, what do you think the difference between activism and advocacy is?
Yeah, I want to jump in. So there is a big difference, but they are both necessary, and you can do both as an individual. So activism is a lot more about like what you typically think of when you see protests, when you see sit-ins or teach-ins. That's all activism, right? It's like fighting for something in society that you believe in at a grassroots level, and it's about pushing back against a system that's oppressive. So think about that when you think of activism. Advocacy is more systems-based. It's like getting involved in the systems that exist to try to change it from within. It's more policy-focused. So looking at how systems are negatively impacting people, and then speaking with the decision makers that control those systems. So you can think of it more as what we call grass tops. It's like meeting with elected officials, nonprofit leaders, administrators that run government. So that's how I would define it. It's like grass tops and grassroots. Does that make sense?
I mean, honestly, that's a perfect explication. I wouldn't add.
Well, thank you for that. For an individual that wants to get involved in advocacy, what would you suggest the first steps be?
I mean, let's be honest, there are a lot of problems to solve out there in the world, so I think you really need to, sit down and do a little soul searching about, what are the key issues that are most important to you that you want to affect, and I think, dive in and learn everything that you can about it, about the history of the issue, the context of the issue. I think whereas, some short-term actions and activism, like going to protest, can feel good in that short run. I think the work of public advocacy is long and hard, and I mean, oftentimes there definitely will be wins, but we'll talk about it maybe a little bit. There are setbacks, and it's important to stay in the fight and know what the long haul is. So I think it's identifying those issues that you want to help tackle, and then you get a sense of what your role might be going into this. I know 3-4 years ago, when the SB 1116 coalition was working, which has to do with the Equitable Payroll Fund, which was an arts funding initiative that has had a lot of ups and downs. I was invited by some other arts makers to join this coalition, and I had never really done this kind of coalition work before. So I was even stepping into this with Master of Public Administration, but I still felt a little. It's easy to walk into these rooms and feel like a little bit of imposter syndrome. Some of these folks have been involved with the issue for a couple of years already, and. So my role at that point was to learn how I could help. I knew that one of the key areas that I excelled in my own work was communications, and so I sought to find ways in which I could support messaging and to help amplify what they were doing. So I think for me though, I think it's important for us as citizens not to create barriers to entry, like our self-imposed ones. Because I think, really anyone and everyone, you don't need a higher advanced degree to get involved with coalitions and committees that may be working on legislative actions and things like that. Find a group of people that you feel like you can vibe with in terms of how they run the work they do, and just get started. Just get started, and it will grow. And if you care about the issue and the folks that that you're working with, and that may morph over time. But I think it's just important to get started.
Yeah, I like to think about this as, so who's done a protest before? Who's been to a protest or a rally? Cool. Yeah, and I think that is such a good starting point for activism, because the most important part of it is being in community, fighting for something you believe in, sharing your voice. And oftentimes when thousands upon thousands of people show up, they're heard, right? There's this past weekend with the No Kings protests, over 11 million people, largest mass protests in this country ever. It's pretty incredible. And they're clearly being heard. What turns the mass anger or heartbreak into action and tangible outcomes is advocacy. It's the people who go into meetings and talk about how to turn the anger and sadness into a policy that actually has an impact on the communities they're fighting on behalf of, right? And so activism is how you get attention, advocacy is how you get change.
Yeah.
And so they do go hand in hand. And I always say, if you really want to see change happen, the easiest way to get involved in advocacy is to talk to your elected official. And folks don't know how easy this is or that they can even do it. It's as long as you can find their contact information, which Arts for LA tries to make that as easy as possible, where you can type in your address and your contact information to our online platform, and it shows you all of your elected officials are at the local, state, federal level, and gives you all of their emails and phone numbers. And so it makes it that easy. And you reach out and you ask for a meeting. And you don't even need to really go into that meeting having a plan. What you need to know going into the meeting is how you feel about whatever's happening and what you want them to do. And it could be something as simple as, you haven't made a statement about the ICE raids. I need you to make a statement. We need to know that you stand with immigrants. And that's a simple ask of an elected official. It can be something more complicated, like you're hearing from groups like ours, hey, I heard there's this policy that would give millions of dollars in funding to the arts. Are you gonna support it? You need to support it. Get them in a meeting with you, and you're their boss. And so oftentimes they will take the meeting, and it might not always be the elected official, it might be a staff member, it usually is a staff member. But honestly, the staff members are the ones who are doing all the work. They're the ones who are writing the policies and putting them on the floor. The elected official is just the face, but they have hundreds of people working for them. So that's the best way to get involved in advocacy. Because you'd be surprised, like the more constituents that they hear from, the more pressure they feel. And elected officials don't like when I say this, but I will say the majority of them are banking that you won't contact them. They're hoping that they don't hear from you. And they'll be like, that's not true, that's not true. It is so true. I've literally been told by an elected office, stop calling me. Because they were annoyed that I kept asking for a meeting. And that was before I worked in the job that I have now. That was just as a constituent who was upset. And so they really are hoping that you don't know what's going on. And so the more of you that actually call and say, I don't know everything, but I know that this bothers me, the more they'll feel pressure to do something.
Yeah, that old adage of the squeaky wheel gets the grease is absolutely true. It's like the more sustained outreach that they get, they have to pay attention to you. And then if you're making if collectively, if you and others are making a case, that's borne out by facts and logic and could potentially affect the re-election chances, I think it matters. It makes impact.
Well, and I know that it can be pretty stressful to think about contacting an elected official too, and so another great way, and this just happened recently, is like if you don't know where to turn to, you turn to organizations like Arts for LA, like Hollywood Fringe Festival, like whoever, Theater Commons LA, whoever you can think of, to just be like, I don't know what to do, but this is what's bothering me, and I need to know where to put my energy. I had 35 artists reach out to me a couple of months back, telling me that they hadn't been paid by the city of Los Angeles for a project they completed last summer. And this was in February of this year. And they didn't get paid until April of this year. So they went 10 months without payment, and each of them was owed $3,000. And they had no idea what to do. And they had tried to contact the city, were told to stop calling. They tried to contact like a fiscal sponsor. I don't need to explain what that is. We don't need to go down that rabbit hole. They were trying to like figure out where's my freaking money. And so they contacted us and things started to get moving. And I'm not saying it's because of us, but what's helpful is like, well, we have the connections. We do speak with elected officials on a regular basis. We do know who to go to address the concern. And these individual artists might not, and honestly, they shouldn't have to. They shouldn't have to be saying, hi, by the way, you might need to pay me.
But I also want to emphasize what you just said, is that there was 35 artists. Did they know there was, like, if I'm an individual artist that needed to get paid, I don't know that there's 35 other artists that also are going through the exact same thing I am. It's not until you get community that you can all fight together because you're all going through it together.
That's exactly right, and so they didn't all know until some of them had contacted us, and then I told them write a letter with like a timeline of events, and then they all got together and they wrote this letter together, and then they all signed it. And so then 35 of them said, we're tasking you, Arts for LA, with figuring this out for us and getting back to us. And so that is their way of getting involved in advocacy. Like if they can't be the one to talk to an elected official because they're so overwhelmed and confused, like find an organization that will do it for you, but don't just sit in silence. And it doesn't have to be a major issue like that. It could just be that you're upset about the way you're being treated on a show, or like, why is it so hard to freaking find funding to produce a show? Like, whatever questions or concerns you have, like, get involved a little bit more.
I'm currently in phone tag with my mother's city council member in Indiana because they won't fix the sidewalk in front of her house. And so it's like, even that, just having the information of like, hi, my mother has contacted you once a month for the last 6 months to get the sidewalk fixed. What are we gonna do about it? And that's something small, but it's still like, that's something that you can continuously poke about. So even if there's small things like your sidewalk is not fixed, that's advocacy.
Absolutely. It just happened in Glendale, the city of Glendale where I live, where they funded Pride events every year. And for some reason this year they weren't going to do it.
For some reason.
For some reason, yeah, we all know why. What's crazy is that a majority of them are council members who have been on the council for many years. But all of a sudden this year, several of them were like, no, we're not going to do it, until constituents said, why? And then they didn't have an answer. And so they were like, well, I guess we can't not do it now since we got asked a question and we don't really know what to say. And a couple of them still voted against it, but it passed and they gave funding to the Pride event. But it's because constituents spoke up and they said, hi, we actually are paying attention. And some people are watching your city council meetings, which can be very boring and are very long. And Michaela and I have talked about this. We want to encourage people to show up in what's called offer public comment. It's literally showing up to say how you feel about a topic on their agenda. Sometimes you're waiting like 4 hours to speak for 30 seconds. And who has time to do that? You know, the general public doesn't have time. I've said before, people will take time off of work and lose out on money, or they'll be late to pick their kid up from school just to speak for 30 seconds to a minute, and then city council is like doing something or eating a sandwich and not even paying attention. But that being said, the more people show up and the more people speak, the more they go, oh, crap, people are paying attention. And that's the whole point of advocacy.
Yeah, it definitely forces transparency. If you want to see increased transparency in your governance, then all these individual acts of advocacy add up to kind of pushing the needle.
Yeah, and I also want to add that it's really not that intimidating talking to your elected officials. It's actually kind of fun to get to know them because they are members of your community and they want to know what's going on. And so even like signing up for their mailing list and being like, hey, by the way, like these shows are happening in your neighborhood, or this is a concern. So you can bring them concerns, and I've called the wrong elected official about something that was like not their, like I called an assembly member instead of a senator, and the staff member was like, well, this isn't the bill we're voting on, and I was like, well, I thought you should know anyway. And like, that was embarrassing, but that staff member doesn't remember my name, I don't remember their name, and it's fine, and I probably have talked to them again since. But those are the things that it's like, even little things, just calling, signing up for newsletters, trying to build a relationship with your elected officials.
Well, I like this idea too of like engaging them in a way that makes it exciting for them too. Like, can I just see by a show of hands, how many of you are producing a show currently? Okay. And how many of you have struggled to figure out how to fund that show? And then how many of you have used your own money to fund the show? Exactly. So those are things that elected officials have no idea is happening. At least most of them don't. And so it'd be really cool if you want to figure out how to get started is invite your elected official to come and see your show. And even if they can't go, a staff member might go and see it. And then you can follow up with them and be like, did you enjoy it? Cool. Did you know that I spent my own money that I earned working my full-time job to produce that show because it's so difficult to find funding to produce theater? Did you know that because the county only invests $1.77 per person in the arts and culture, and it's like 258th now in the nation, LA County is, for funding the arts? Like, because of that, I have to spend my tips to put on theater. That's what speaks to them, because they'll go like, oh crap, well I really liked that show. I didn't know that you spent your barista money, putting on theater. That kind of stuff really speaks to elected officials. Otherwise they don't know. Like, they're not experts in the arts, and so they're only gonna learn from you.
Do you guys have any questions about getting involved in arts advocacy? All right, I'm gonna come back to y'all, so start thinking of questions. What would you say is probably the biggest reason why people don't participate in advocacy? What do you think is holding people back? I know I'm throwing we went through our list of questions, so now
I got it. I will say that the number one thing that most people tell me prevents them from advocating is time. They do not have the time. They are so busy working multiple jobs. One, I'm sure this is some of you, working multiple jobs and then adding another job to their plate, which is producing a show. And we forget that that is a job. I know that when I was working in theater, I constantly forgot, like, oh yeah, rehearsing 40 hours a week, more like 50, or 60. And like, the hours I'm spending driving back and forth from here to Orange County because I worked a lot at South Coast Repertory, like that is a full-time job. And I was doing that while teaching at 2 different schools, while being a housekeeper, and while being an executive assistant in a nonprofit. I was like working 4 to 5 jobs at one time and was not getting 8 hours of sleep a night, and still wasn't making enough money to pay for my health care, all of that stuff, right? So it is totally understandable that people are like, I do not have the time to even think about calling my elected official because I just want to go to bed. That's one. The second is usually fear. Like, what would I even say? What if I say the wrong thing? What if I sound stupid? I don't have enough information on like how to get them to understand what I'm fighting for. And what I always tell people is like, policy is about you. Policy is about people. And so you don't have to be like an expert in, I threw out a stat at you, like $1.77 per person invested in the arts and culture in LA County. You don't need to know that to speak to an elected official. You can just go to them and say, this is my experience, this is what I'm struggling with, and we elect you to figure out how to help people like me. And so I shouldn't have to come up with a solution for you. I'm asking you what the solution is based on my concerns and my experience. And so like breaking down that fear a little bit, like it's just about sharing what you're going through. But those are the 2 big things that I hear.
Yeah, I mean, I think fear and time would be kind of at the top of my list. I don't think there's really anything else obstacle-wise or that maybe if I encountered it. I mean, this was making me also think sort of just broadly like what kind of media environment we're in now and, how connected or not we may be to. I mean, in some ways, we should theoretically through social media be more connected to, to our electeds and what they have to say, but that environment is also so managed depending on on who it is, But yeah, I would agree with that. I think fear and time are the 2. I think the fear is the one, ironically, I think that could be the easiest to get over. Time could feel a little bit more difficult, but I think that's then again a case of prioritizing what is most important to you. And I will posit that I think if you get involved with a community of people that feels like your people, that you feel welcomed into, then finding the time for it will feel less burdensome because it'll just feel like, rather than like, oh, this task that I have to make this phone call or I have to send this email, it feels like you're part of a team. It feels like a value add in your life personally, and makes you feel like you're connected to that group and then connected to that issue. So I think that would be the sort of antidote to that for me.
Well, and I'll say like one solution if you don't have the time is that like organizations like Theater Commons LA and like Arts for LA do try to make it as easy as possible to take action too. Like if you can't make the phone call, send a letter. And again, it's like put your email in, your zip code, your name, and then there's a pre-written letter and you hit send. And it takes like 1 minute, And so you could do it in an Uber on your way to a bar. I mean, really, you're waiting for a show to start at Hollywood Fringe, and you're like, I'm gonna take this 1 minute to like send this letter and then put my phone on airplane mode, and you're done. There are easy ways like that. But I always encourage people to go beyond that because a pre-written letter isn't as meaningful as hearing about your experience firsthand, and that's just the reality. But I understand the time concern because again, I've been there.
So again, we talked about the equitable payroll fund, which is a whole thing, but we had a bunch of us were calling the governor, and you can just leave voicemails. You don't even have to talk to anybody. And so I would like call after hours, just go direct to voicemail, and I'm just chatting away. I'm like, I think one time I said, I was like driving, and I was like, well, yeah, you should care about this because blah, 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 blah. And I was just like chatting away, and I was like, here's your podcast, Newsom. Like, it's so easy. And again, you can do it really anywhere, and yeah, those are my favorite things.
I've definitely done one of those things where I leave a voicemail and then call back and leave another voicemail to continue what I was saying.
Yeah, oh my God, love that.
I'm not done. You're like, hi, this is Ricky Abeles again. Okay, as I was saying.
And I also was like, hi, this is the 4th time I've called you this week. Like, how's it going? I also, at least for me, to get over the fear of speaking at LA City Council, which is a whole other thing. I've done I went to school in a small town, so I was like friends with the city councilors because they just were like there. But like LA City Council is big, and it's very ominous and very scary. But I always remembered that I was there for something bigger than myself, and I had to get over myself to advocate for all the people that couldn't be here. Like, I'm lucky right now. I'm in a position where I had the time. I brought snacks. I don't have kids that I had to pick up from practice or whatever. So I was like, I'm sitting here for every single person who wants to be here but can't. And that was how I was able to really just like get over myself and get over the fact that, like Ricky said, they're not even looking at you. They're going through their bag. They're like over, and you're just like, that's so humiliating. I'm not a performer, so like it feels humiliating. But we saved the DCA. We did. It got that was a big win. Yeah. Ricky and I by ourselves. I'm just kidding. But it was letters. Like, Ricky and I were the only people there to speak on the arts, but there was hundreds and hundreds of letters sent to City Council and calls made. So it all adds up.
Yeah, last year so DCA is the Department of Cultural Affairs for the City of Los Angeles, and they fund grant programs to support arts organizations, productions, things like that, programs, public programming. And they have a small budget already. And last year they tried to cut the programming pretty significantly, and they did cut 11 positions at the department, which made it harder for them to pay people on time, things like that. And so this year they were going to cut 24 additional positions from their department, one of which was in contracting, so it would have made it even slower to work with the nonprofits and to pay people on time. And they were going to cut about $2 million from grants and programming. And so yes, there were like a little over 1,000 letters sent. We showed up to offer comment. We had an advocacy day where people came to City Hall with me, Michaela, Arts for LA, and met with city council members and said, here are our priorities. And all of that saved all 24 positions and all $2 million for programming. Yeah, I'm so glad to hear the snaps, because so often I'll hear advocates be like, well, that's not really a win. Because it's like, we're just keeping what we already had. And I'm like, oh no, it is a huge win. Because can you imagine how much worse off we'd be if we did lose $2 million in grant funding and 24 positions? And like, it's hard to kind of get people to understand that sometimes. Like, it doesn't feel, euphoric to celebrate keeping what we have, but it is a win. And I think that that's another part of advocacy, is like being able to celebrate when we actually accomplish something, and not just be like, okay, what's next? I remember when we got an additional $1.2 million for a grant program at the county level, we were celebrating, screaming from the rooftops, because we had been working for like over 10 years to get any semblance of an increase for that grant program, and it would not happen. And we finally got it last year, and so many advocates were like, it's 1.2 million. Yeah, 1.2 million more that we haven't had for 10 years, and granted it is not anywhere near the amount that we need, but can we just like celebrate for a little while and then we can get back to the fight, right? Because we can always use more, but that's a big part of advocacy. Celebrate the win for a little bit and then move forward.
Yeah.
And I think everyone here should follow artsforla.org so that you can keep up on these things. And like Ricky has said, they do make it pretty darn easy to take direct action on these things. Like, I think that the next round of harm reduction is really at the county level now, right?
Oh yeah. I'm sorry, I won't spend too much time on this. So $2 million at the city level. It was only $600,000 that they were going to cut at the county level. That changed this last week. It's now close to $2 million. So they're cutting the grant program that I just mentioned that got a $1.2 million increase. They're cutting that in half. So they're trying to cut $600,000 from that program now. They're cutting a different grant program by $250,000. And then the internship program, which is like a huge program for the county, it places college graduates or folks who are about to graduate college in internship. Was there one outside? Oh my God, we have an arts intern sitting literally right outside. It is an incredible program, and it's not just about giving young people opportunities. A lot of those internships turn into full-time jobs with nonprofits that they work with. So they're cutting that program in half. So literally like 100 less interns next year if this cut goes through. It's crazy. And so we have a letter campaign right now where you can put in your info. If you go to artsforla.org, under the drop-down that says lead, you'll see take action. That's where you can go to see all of these campaigns, or you can just type into Google Arts for LA Action Center, and it'll be like the first thing that pops up. And we have 3 campaigns going. We have a letter campaign to protect county funding, a phone bank campaign to call the governor's office and say, hi, please fund the performing arts, because he's trying to cut it. And then the third one is asking the state to audit LAUSD for misusing funds. They're supposed to be using millions of dollars, $70 million on arts education programming in their district, and they misused it on other things, like field trips and like renovations of gyms and things like that, allegedly. And so we're asking the state to audit that. So yeah, take action when you can.
To also hype up Arts for LA, I personally participated in a program called Activate Delegates, and I was taught exactly how to ask for a meeting from for my year, it was a county supervisor, and how to organize a meeting, how to get other people to join me, and it was a really powerful program. One, because I learned how easy some of that stuff is, that you can just email your county supervisor and be like, hey, what's up, can we chat? But just finding that link and knowing that that's something that you can do. And so I definitely recommend the Activate Delegates program. I said I would come back to you all.
Thank you all for all this. I'm curious a little bit about, you said you train advocates. Can you just paint a little bit of a picture of what that means, and how do you once you train them, how do you sort of push their boat into the ocean? Where do you start?
Yeah, so the program that Michaela was just talking about, Activate Delegates, it's our big flagship training program. And SOX actually, hi SOX. SOX just finished that program. Has done several of our programs, I believe.
True.
But just finished Delegates, and basically what we do is we teach folks what is government at the local level, the differences between county government versus city government. We really dial in on the city of LA because it's the biggest, but just in case you all didn't know, there are 88 cities in LA County. And so when people talk about LA, they're not really talking about the city of LA, they're talking about the county of LA. And there are 10 million people in the county of LA. So 88 cities, even more school districts. And so we break all of that down. What are the functions of county government versus city? And then we also teach people what is the structure of an advocacy meeting? When you do meet with an elected official, what do you start with? How do you end? We go through data points, kind of like what I shared with you earlier, to build that narrative. And then folks have mock meetings where they get to practice meeting with an elected official, and the culmination of the program is actually meeting with a supervisor on the County Board of Supervisors, and getting to advocate for your needs and the priorities laid out in Arts for LA's policy agenda, based on engaging with hundreds of arts workers and artists in the county. We build an agenda for 2 years, and these delegates, what we call them, get to advocate for those needs too. That's just one program we do. We have several others that I won't spend a ton of time talking about. You can read more about them on our website. But to your point about then how do we keep them engaged? We have a network of over 700 alumni from that one program. There's a LinkedIn group. We also have a newsletter that goes out to specifically that group with action alerts and things like that. But the hope and desire at Arts for LA is that those people stay involved, so that when we do send out things like these letter campaigns or ask people to call the governor, that these people feel more empowered because they've gone through the program to actually do that when they get the email.
I would just add to that too, if you feel like you don't have the bandwidth for a full-on program, I think getting involved even just in the annual advocacy days at City Hall is a really great crash course I think it's well formatted. You know, it's one awesome, intense day of speaking up for the arts, getting a chance to meet with like a council member's office, etc. It's just actual on the ground experience. You'll be like, at the end of the day, you'll feel like, oh, I did that. You know.
Yeah, and you're provided with the script, and you always do it in groups. Like you're never alone. So then you can like build on each other's ideas. But yeah, Chris has done that. I think it would also be cool. I know you asked specifically to Arts for LA, but as someone who runs a theater, talking about like how to balance, running a theater or producing theater while also getting involved in this way, because all of these folks produce.
Sure. I mean, in some ways, it's inextricably linked, and of course, all of our lives are like constant competing priorities. So, I think probably everyone out here is a consummate multitasker. And in some ways, it's if we can get ourselves out of urgency mode, that's really beautiful. But at this particular time, it is a lot of sort of like, what's the next fire I need to deal with? So, and oftentimes I'm feeling that either in the in the logistics of production. But also, or importantly, when I swoop up to sort of like 40,000 feet in the air to look at the bigger picture, it is also really vital for me as a leader to be staying involved in these advocacy pieces, because I'm trying to change the map so that all of us on the ground doing the production don't have to pedal so fast in the hamster wheel. So making time and space to tackle these issues, and as I alluded to earlier for Celebration Theater, it's sort of the two core prongs for me in the advocacy space have to do with funding and or bias, intolerance to queer and trans people, and that takes place both in terms of legislation as well as. They say every budget is an expression of priority and values. So it's important for me to stay in those conversations with the community and with legislators and folks who are working with nonprofits and community organizations and all of that, so that they're also aware of what's important to our own missions community, and that is, of course, queer storytelling. So it makes for a busy week, but it's also, I think, it's also so vital to just be connected to these conversations, because I think it actually, as an arts producer, it's going to strengthen the work that you do if the kind of programmatic decisions you're making and the kind of planning you're doing is representative of and reflective of the community that you want to serve. If you're making art in your vacuum, and this is to say that there's plenty of great writing that happens in a cabin in the woods, But for me, and specifically for our mission, I think staying connected to the community in really deep, real ways only serves to inform the impact and inform a stronger impact for the work that we do.
I think both of you have been incredible. I also really want to emphasize that as individuals, as people that aren't necessarily representing full theater companies or full nonprofits, we all still have a really important role in this, because I think, as we've mentioned, City Council, Board of Supervisors, people aren't aware of how many artists are in Los Angeles and the work that they're doing for Los Angeles. And a lot of these things, I know we've thrown out things like Equitable Payroll Fund, SB 805, SB 1116, blah, 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 OGP grants, but all of these things do impact you as an individual artist. And I think the main goal is to say, like, you also have stakes in this and your voice really matters in this. And luckily, as theater people, we're storytellers and we can be really funny and dramatic and earnest. And I think we have to really utilize those skills to bring along our elected officials.
Can I make one final plug?
Of course.
Come up to me and talk to me afterwards if you are an LGBTQ individual artist and or you work for a mission that is a queer arts mission. There is a new coalition forming that has a first convening this summer in July to do a listening session and really talk about what's been happening in these last 5 months. If you know, you know, I don't have to go much further into that, but around access and funding and visibility and safety. We want to make sure we have the broadest swath of the community in the room to talk about these things, so come say hello.
I will also quickly plug Theater Commons LA, and then we'll see if anybody has one last question. So if you think you want to ask a question, ponder it. Theater Commons LA is a new service organization dedicated to theater companies, and what's new is that this service organization is also including individual artists and theater makers. So that's what's different than previous service organizations that maybe have not made it past the pandemic. Is that individual artists are included. So we are going to be launching a theater listing website this fall, and with that, individual memberships along with theater company memberships. So if you want to sign up as a member as a theater company or an individual artist, that's up to you. But you can follow us on theatercommons.la on Instagram, or theatercommonsla.org is our website. Great. All right, any last questions? Anybody? How to get involved, advocacy, activism? Great. Well,
follow Arts for LA too. It's Arts, the number 4 LA on social media, and then artsforla.org online.
they also post job postings.
Yeah, there's job opportunities, all of that, and there's so much more I want to tell you. Like, you can get funding from elected officials for your shows too.
You can.
And so yeah, not enough time in a panel to tell you about all those things. So reach out to us.
Yeah, great. And then if you have any questions that you maybe were just too shy to ask to the larger group, we'll be around for a little bit. You can also get our contact information. But thank you so much to Fringe for letting us be here and talk about advocacy. And yeah, we love Fringe and we love to be here. And thank you so much again, Chris and Ricky, for being here. We run into each other at every advocacy thing ever. So I was like, what if we take our normal conversation and have it in front of people?
Podcast, anyone?
Podcast. Like and subscribe. Well, thank you all so much.
Thank you.